Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeanette Moreland, marketing lead at Next Economy, and I am delighted to be joined on our podcast today by the one and only Phoenix Soleil. Phoenix is a Haitian-American artist, activist, and educator with a deep interest in the intersections of community, emotional intelligence, and trauma. She teaches and practices insight meditation and is a certified trainer in nonviolent communication. But best of all, she is one of my team members and a worker owner at Next Economy. Everybody say Phoenix! How are you? I'm so excited that we're finally getting a chance to do this conversation.
Yeah, I'm very excited too. I mean, this is one of the things that I love to do is talk about communication, talk about culture, bring that to more people. It's made my life a better place. I want to make the world a better place. Yep.
Amazing. Well, we have a lot to get into today, but I want to start by just having folks, you've been a familiar voice on this podcast, and I know a lot of people know and love you, but I'm curious if you can just give us a little bit of the Phoenix life story. How did you get into the work that you're doing today?
Well, in another life, I had an IT business, and and I was on my own. I was like, I'm going to do the entrepreneurial thing. But even then, my heart is so important to me. So it was tech support for people who were technophobes. Because even then, I just enjoyed being the person that helps people where I can make a difference, where I feel like I'm not just going there and like giving them fixing their computer, that I get to support them and empower them. And so I was helping like women entrepreneurs and people who are elderly learn their tech. And then I saw this poster at the food co-op, the Park Slope Food Co-op, and it said, how to get along with difficult people, especially yourself. And I was like intrigued. I was like, as any entrepreneur knows, that it's like about being able to talk to clients. It's about being able to talk to prospective clients. So I went to my first workshop, and it was on the anniversary of 9/11. And there was something different about it. The way we were able to go into so much depth so quickly. And I was in New York. So this is a very intense thing for all of us, and to be able to share the stories. And I felt it was very healing. So I was like intrigued. And so I ended up doing some courses, and I was like, wow, this is interesting. I remember when I first saw, so one of the things about nonviolent communication is that you have the feelings and needs list. And so you have this list of feelings, pleasant feelings and difficult feelings like anger, like sadness, like I have this all over now. Like I had a friend help me with home organizing, and she's like, there was this package of feelings and needs list everywhere. And just like, okay, at least I'm walking my talk. Hey, at least you can say that. But
oh yeah.
Yeah. So you have all the feelings, and it's like gloomy, overwhelmed, jittery, goofy, and then the positive, open, thankful, radiant. And then you have the needs list. And it was just like, as growing up, and, so much gratitude to my family. But I feel like the vocabulary I had for my feelings was about 5. And seeing 2 sheets of feelings and needs was just like, woo. And then getting to talk to other people about their feelings and needs, and feeling like I didn't have to do it in some kind of therapeutic, even though it was healing, it wasn't like I was taking responsibility for fixing them. In fact, that was one of the things that was like changed, like, because I wasn't someone who had a lot of conflict in my life. I got along with people really well. But what happened is that the quality of my connections, because I used to think if a friend had a problem, it was my job to try to fix it. And then NVC was just like, no, you don't. In fact, people usually don't want advice unless they ask for it. And so then I was using this thing called empathy, where I was connecting about where they were instead of trying to fix it. And so my conversations had more depth. And then what really helped, okay, so I think about a year into nonviolent communication, I ran into a very tumultuous love affair that I had. And I was like, okay, it's been on my mind to finally say some truths here. I'm sorry. I think we are going maybe longer than we planned to in this direction. But I think it's important to also know the personal dimension of how it made a difference in my life. So I'm talking and I'm saying things, but I've learned how to say things that where I'm saying the truth, but I probably wouldn't have been able to a couple of years earlier say that truth because I would have been stuck in all the ways that I would have said it thinking that it would hurt her. And instead, I got to say it in a way that was just like saying my truth and being real and also like being able to like be open and like listen and also say things that were at the essence instead of feeling like you are this or you are that. And at one point she was like, you weren't like this when we were this is not what was going on. And so it was just a sign to me because I had achieved something because I was talking about something that was painful and hurtful, and I was able to do it with clarity. I was able to be authentic, and I felt like I was challenging and really trying to get at something, but I felt like I was still caring for the person. And why I love NVC is because I was an activist in New York around grassroots media activism. And I was also always working with nonprofits because I always wanted my work to be something about change. And what kept showing up is like, my God, the conflict in these places. Like, I just was like, forget about making a change in the world if we can't even get along with each other. But then I learned these tools and I was like, oh, wow, when you actually are honest and you talk about the conflict and you do it with skill, it brings you closer. And so that was just like, like the angels are floating down and the birds are singing. Because now it's like, and that's what I've been able to give to my clients, the organizations, is that I will go, one of the things I do is I mediate. So you'll have someone, and then people can relate to this. You have a work situation. There might be 3 years of experiences that have been hard. And so these are people who are trying to collaborate and they're trying to use business as a force for good and they can't listen to each other. And part of what I'm doing is offering all of these tools and helping them slow down. Because usually what we do when we're having a difficulty is someone says something and then we respond to it like, no, this is what happened and stuff. And the thing is that we're talking in a way that makes it actually hard for each person to listen. So some of the tools is just to slow down and say, let's first really hear what was important about that statement before we go on. And the thing about it is that when someone feels really heard, they're open enough to hear you.
Yeah.
So people will get to this place where there was rigidity and pain, openness and understanding and kind of aha moments and like, oh, that's where it was coming from. And that's what you want for businesses because it's not just about, okay, now we're not fighting, we can collaborate easier. It's also that now that we're not fighting, we can actually have conflict in a healthier way because you want people to argue, actually. You want people to disagree because like you're a marketing person, right? Sometimes I'll say to you, let's do this. And you're like, no, Phoenix, no. And I'm glad that's what psychological safety is about. You're like, no.
Yeah, totally. Wow. I feel like we could honestly do 5 spin-off podcasts from this. I feel like we need a cultural offerings for the eldest daughter of like a second gen immigrant family because you were just like dropping all this stuff about empathy and care and concern and this just like really tricky world we're in where we don't have good models for communication. Yeah, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about communication as usual and maybe the systemic layers, because like from where I'm sitting, it feels like there are certain people or like institutions that can feel very loud. And then in my own life, it can be really hard to like engage in that conflict. And it feels like there's a bit of a power dynamic there. So yeah, what's like the water that we swim in? Because it sounds like your journey has been towards like finding skillful communication. And I don't think that we are equipped with those skills as it stands right now.
No. Yeah, no. And talk about the cultural, because I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, it's like that in a subway token, like talking about your feelings.
Yeah.
I had a friend who came from the Bay Area and they went to New York and they're like, God, why are New Yorkers always trying to prove to me how smart they are? And I'm like, actually, I don't see it that way. I think we're trying to prove how we know more than the other person because you have to earn affection in New York.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's very related. I mean, what Lift Economy is about is how to use business as a force for change. And we look very much at what are the systems of the economy, what are the patterns in society, and how we're recreating dynamics. And the thing is that there are different ways of doing things that are very healthy, that are more healthy. There's ways of, for example, agriculture that actually feeds the soil so that the foods can have more minerals. And there's ways of creating businesses like where you can share profit and you can have systems of production that aren't extractive. And with communication, I think we've inherited some of that extractive scarcity mode where this is a culture where we have to repress a lot in order to survive. And we've been told that's what adulthood is.
Oof. Oof. I got chills actually from that. Felt like you were speaking in my brain, but go ahead.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes people think slavery happened to a group of people, but actually it's like, this is how this society runs, like is on this idea of cheap labor. And that feeling that part of how the society runs is somehow getting off on something or taking advantage, or how do I make even if you're totally trying to make a legal profit, there's a bit of how do I scam the system in order to do that? Mm-hmm. And the thing is that we can actually create a system that doesn't require that. And how it transfers into language is that I think sometimes we think, well, if we make room for feelings, if we make room for connection, we'll never get to work. And this is an idea that because we live in a society where we're just trying to sometimes feel like we have to extract, that people aren't going to work. But actually, the thing about nonviolent communication is that we believe in that the needs that people are trying to meet, that some of the needs are a contribution. And that if you create a system where the thing is that if you connect to people on a real level, what happens is that when there's enough psychological safety, the good of people can show up. And this is true that there are sometimes, I mean, I don't want to say that there are people who, because of their backgrounds, they have been hurt to such a degree that it might not be possible for one person or one organization to be able to help them to the point where they can be a responsible part of an organization. But that's different from saying that person is not possible for that person to change or for people to change in general. Because sometimes it is part of my job to support people in saying this is not a fit and to say this is not healthy. And because the thing is that we've inherited a system that's so huge and so big that when we have these small, like really struggling nonprofits or co-ops, and it might not be possible to do all the things you want to do because you have to sometimes focus on your mission in order to survive. Still, there's a lot that is possible. There's a lot of times that people they repress because they think, okay, what that my coworker just did hurt that hurt. I'm feeling really stressed. I feel less trust, but I'm going to be an adult and I'm going to put it down. I'm going to just see the best in them. But then what happens is that 2 weeks later, something similar happens. Another month, something similar happens. Then, it's happening every couple of weeks. And then every time it happens, you have less patience around it. There's less tolerance. And then at some point, maybe it's not even about that thing, but there's a volcano. And then you do talk about it, but you don't trust them because somewhere around year 2, you stop trusting them, but you didn't mention it.
Oh, yeah.
And then I come in And then sometimes it's like, okay, we might need a couple of mediations to get to it. Yeah. I want to just check back about your question, though. I'm worried that I did not address it directly.
No, I think that you did. I mean, the repression of feelings, meaning that you're an adult or that's an adult way to deal with things, really resonated with me. And yeah, I think that a lot of folks can relate to that. And you're totally right. Just because you do that adult thing and you don't talk about the thing doesn't mean that it goes away, because we do, as you mentioned, have these feelings and needs, even if we don't have language for them. And so I think a really skillful part of the work that you're doing, and maybe that you found at NBC, is finding that language and shared vocabulary, and then being able to kind of like have that self-connection so that we can actually have the authentic connection with other people. I think it's been really modeled very beautifully for me at Lyft and some of our team interchanges. I am totally one of those people who thought, if there's conflict, that means it's over. You know, you save all of your workplace drama or something for your exit letter or interview. But it's like, how many times along the way could that have been met and lead to deeper relationship and contribution? I'm sure that's an experience for a lot of folks that are going to be listening to this conversation. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about your work with NBC. You recently became a certified NBC trainer. I guess I'm curious, for folks who aren't super familiar, if you could share a little bit more about what that is, how it's kind of changed recently and been supportive to your work as well.
Right. And I just realized I never defined nonviolent communication. I just went
off there.
Yeah. So let's start there. It's amazing because it's a philosophy. It's also a way. I mean, one of the ways I describe it is that I grew up Catholic and I was told to love my neighbor, but no one told me how to do this. And it's easy to get into this idea that love your neighbor means sacrifice. Definitely Christianity, you can understand where that might come from. And it's about not caring about myself. I think that was the internal definition as a 5-year-old I came to. It's like, don't care about yourself, care about the other person, and then you're loving. And then a nonviolent communication is like a structure of being self-aware, like actually connecting to yourself and using that self-empathy and how to connect to other people and some skills for how am I going to invite the best of myself and others when I'm in a dialogue or interaction with them. And so it's a bunch of techniques and different ways of doing that.
I'm wondering if you can maybe share an example. So you obviously have done a lot of this training kind of internally to Lyft, but have started to offer some workshops to folks. And I'm wondering if you can maybe share examples of what, having those tools and techniques can result for outcomes for people when they're trying to deal with a challenging situation.
Yes. So like one of the things I'll do is I will coach people with conflicts or tensions that they're experiencing. And it's one of those things where I had a client who came to me and they were just like, I feel that this person doesn't trust me and it's really painful. And so we started role playing that situation. And I pretended to be her and she pretended to be the employee. And I was able to get her to see some dynamics that she wasn't seeing. Because as a leader, it's like one of those things where what you need to do is encourage dissent. Mm-hmm. And you don't realize sometimes that it's like a typical thing that we might be, oh, let me explain to you why I did that. But that when you do that, when someone offers you difficult feedback and you first start with offering, this is why I did that, what people here is, oh, then it was okay. I mean, it's like, yeah. So one of the things I do is just like, can we acknowledge it? Can we just sit with it? Even saying sorry, because if you notice, if you give me difficult feedback and I say, oh, I'm sorry, sometimes the social contract is now I let it go and I go on. But if instead I say, oh, I hear that, I'm curious, how difficult was that for you? Or can you tell me more? Or something's like, I can imagine that maybe that had this impact on you. And what that does is that, oh, I get to share how that feels. So now I'm not alone with it. What you're offering me is accompaniment with it. And one of the things I had to also explain is that when that happens, sometimes people might actually get more upset.
Yeah, they have permission to be upset.
Yeah, and that's actually good because it's a different way of looking at it, but that means that there's more trust. Actually, a lot of people feel that and this is really also helpful for people doing work around when you're working with any situation where you have privilege or more power, because sometimes we can have this idea that respect means that I agree with you, I'm very respectful, but actually another way of looking at it is that if I trust you, if I can tell you what's real, then that's a different kind of level of trust. And so it's like allowing that upset to be there and listen to it. And you get to have more truth because they're allowing you to see their vulnerability. It's actually less vulnerable to just say, oh, yeah, thanks, no problem. It was fine. No worries. And then they go home and have an hour-long conversation with their partner about how upsetting that was.
Absolutely. Totally.
Yeah. And then people say, oh, there's no place for feelings at work. But why do people leave work? Because they don't like it. They have a feeling about it. And if you care about retention, which you should, because it's really expensive to have people come in and leave all the time. If you want to be able to hold on to people, be able to get the best work, then yeah, making a psychologically safe space is important. So
totally. That was beautiful, super useful. I want to add one follow-up question, maybe going off the rails here, but you mentioned something really important about acknowledging if someone's coming to you with a challenging situation, acknowledging that impact and that it might open up more feelings or anger. And for folks who are listening who are like, I'm in this situation, I've been in this situation, and yeah, totally the lens of privilege and power there. For folks who might be in that position where they've wronged someone and they're acknowledging, are there any resources or advice you can give on staying centered and not reacting to be defensive, especially if it's inviting maybe more of a negative reaction for someone else? Like, how are you able to like be open and stay open?
Right. Actually, I created a whole course on that. Staying grounded under fire. That's why I created it, because I was doing the communication courses, like I have the surfing workplace waves and then offering feedback in the workplace and then how to have conversations about racial justice. And by the way, I mean, it's about work, but NVC is applicable to anything. It's just that, yeah. So, I mean, the skills are transferable to any place. But the reason I did standing on the grid is because I'm talking about all this and I have to bring in some of the skills about just being present. Like, and so that's what the standing under fire is. Like, it's just going into a deep dive. I mean, I do touch on it in every workshop about the self-connection. And what I love about that workshop is that I'm doing two things. I'm doing the short term and I'm also talking about the long term, because there's things that you can do short term to be able to just take in something that someone is doing that's triggering to help you just stay focused. But long term, it's about doing these practices, like whatever, like if it's every week, if it's every day, that build your capacity and places where you can transform. Like, you know, because this is a world where you're getting manure bullshit all the time. And if you don't have a place to compost it, what you're doing is what the society does, which is you're putting it into the landfill and it's smelling up your life.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I totally experienced that. I had the chance to take your offering feedback workshop last year, and I'm totally that person. I think very easily conditioned to be over empathetic to the feelings and needs of others. I didn't have that language for my own feelings and needs. Again, it was very much like the right thing to do is put yourself in someone else's shoes. But I still felt those feelings of resentment or the unmet need. And you really helped just kind of help me learn that acknowledging those things isn't scary. It's not bad. It's actually the kindest thing that I can do to that person is at least like self-acknowledge and kind of connect what I'm experiencing to what they're experiencing as well. Even if it's not a pleasant emotion, it's an honest emotion and it's got to go somewhere. So better to just kind of like have the courage to be in that conversation with someone and have it be the potential for a deeper relationship than bottling it up or talking about it with someone else or just kind of holding it in. So yeah, it's been really powerful. Since you mentioned the workshop series, I'm curious if you could just like tell us a little bit about culture offerings, why you decided to start it, who it might be a good
I
fit
want to,
for.
but what you just said, though, I need to say something about that because
Yeah.
I think people hear the word nonviolent communication and they hear the word compassionate. Sometimes it's also called compassionate communication. And so they think it's all about being nicey nice. But actually, like, that's such an important point because sometimes it's compassion to the parts of you that are raging angry. And to realize that underneath that is a beautiful need. To me, that's the compassion, is that it's also having compassion that sometimes people aren't going to talk to you in a way that is most comfortable. And can you stretch when it's possible, when you have the resource, stretch into like understanding and looking for what is the beautiful need underneath that. I mean, to me, that's where it's like, you know, you're being asked to connect to your Buddhahood, your Christ energy, your Zen space, whatever you want to call it, and bring that to fore. But it's not about repressing. It's really about that composting. And it's like, how can I be authentic and also give you the benefit of a doubt so that when I'm coming to the conversation, I'm saying my truth and I'm open to where you're coming from. And before I talk about my cultural offerings, I want to say that it's not just like I bring some of my meditation because we were talking about like what helps. And that's one of the reasons why in the other coming up in these culture series podcasts, I'm going to interview Lama Rod, who does meditation, because I feel like doing things around connecting to yourself and being embodied is so important to being able to do this kind of work. And then I could talk about the other people in the cultural series later. But my culture series, say your question again.
Yeah, I was just curious. So you mentioned a couple of workshops around it, and I really feel like they all connect really well to each other. But I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit more about the topics that'll be covered and who it might be a good fit for folks who are listening to this and like, yes, I need this help. What is this about? Yeah, kind of the skills that you kind of walk folks through.
Yeah. So I think the thread that runs through all of them is like they're different. Like one of the things that people come is like, how do I really care for my own feelings and needs? And because it's so trained into us that a good person is pushing them down. But then, so it's looking at that from different angles. It's also like what the communication skills that you need to go, but it starts with that self-connection and then practicing using that self-connection when you're actually in dialogue with other people. And what I try to tell people is bring real situations. And I'm sometimes live coaching people on how to use those skills in the workshop. And it's a lot about in the NVC basics. It's like, so we start with self-empathy and then we look at some of the skills for conversations with other people. Offering feedback is a 2-session. And that's where it's like we go deeper into some of the tools that nonviolent communication offers for like bringing that consciousness into a dialogue, like how the language tools can support, but then how to make it your own voice. Because the thing about it is these skills are so powerful that sometimes people are like, okay, I'm going to use that. But then that's distractive. And people feel it. People feel it because it's kind of like I'm using this to get my own way. So some of what I teach is like, how do you get to the place where it's not just a technique, but you're actually embodying it. And that's where you keep coming back to the self-connection piece. But it's not just self-connection. It's like, how do I, before I even get to that conversation, how do I open myself up to their point of view and where they might be coming from? And then how that changes how you are, because people are listening to your body language, people are listening to your tone of voice. And sometimes you can be really good at masking stuff, but it's really hard if you work with someone or you're in a partnership with someone to keep masking for a long time. Eventually it starts to wear on you. And so you need to do that work where you're honestly dealing with the manure and composting it. Like, I can't save you from that. I mean, even
Yeah, I totally. And I'm so glad that you're offering these. I will say, I know that some of them are designed for workplace, but I've used them a lot in just my personal relationships and interpersonal dynamics. But I also think it's so important for Next Economy organizations. I know you mentioned working in activist groups, and it can be really tricky because sometimes it feels implicit, like, oh, we're all here for this shared purpose and goal. And so we should be able to just set aside these disagreements or dissent because we're servicing this goal. And even a really beautiful like vision or mission organization doesn't mean that there shouldn't be dissent, doesn't mean that there's not that repression of feelings. And I feel like I've witnessed a couple of situations like that where there are really good intentions, but there wasn't enough investment in kind of this, as you mentioned, next economy regenerative version of communication. And so it's really important because I feel like it's the care. It's like the way that you can care and support the vision is by like supporting people and understanding that like we may have shared alignment, but our histories, our traumas, the like barriers of language we use are all super different. So yeah, I'm very excited.
Yeah, and you brought up the different backgrounds, and that brings me to the how to have conversations about racial justice. And I've attended a lot of anti-racist and different workshops. And the thing that I love is that what I felt like is like I wanted to do something that from its groundwork was looking at compassion as not something nice, but actually as a powerful tool for being effective at having these conversations. Because a lot of people feel like if I'm compassionate and someone has just said some racist comment, then that means I don't address them. But actually, compassion is what allows you to go deeper into the levels and the layers of feeling. And then the compassion is because if you actually are compassionate, like I said, I've often been in workplaces where I'm the one who's saying things that are difficult to people because I'm the only one who has faith that they can change. I'm the only one that has faith that they might be able to listen, because I've been in places where everyone's talking about that thing that person did or the way they are, but no one's saying anything because they're cynical or all these other things. So compassion to me actually it supports you in these situations. And even when you don't go and end up talking to them, compassion is what allows me to be in my home and have an open, like, to still have compassion for life and to like, you're in my heart. I care about you. I'm never going to have you in my living room.
Phoenix, it's so beautiful. It really is an act of faith and leaning in instead of turning away. And honestly, the next economy requires all of us. We talk about just kind of this critical mass needed. And so if we're boxing people out or only like, I'm just going to talk to these people who only have like my shared identities and values, as we just talked about, you can have a lot in common with someone and still have that dissent, and that's healthy dissent. But also, I think if, folks who are in this space, if we think that we're just going to create this utopia somewhere else, that doesn't exist. We're here on this earth with messy people and messy human beings. And first of all, we need to model that self-compassion that is sticking with me in my mind, because I've just been thinking during this, it's like, how could I possibly have real compassion for others if I don't have compassion for myself? I'm starting to think that I've offered a lot of fake compassion to people. And so it's like really starting with that and leaning in. But again, it's that transforming of things that potentially feel really scary into something that's like this really generative, like a rich compost for understanding that we really need to like make anything happen. So yeah, I just think that that's really beautiful. I know that you mentioned La Mirade. We love La Mirade and super excited about having them on the show. But I'm curious if you can also share if there are any other folks or tools or resources that have been useful into this journey that folks might want to engage with as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited about La Mirade, and also I'm excited about Roxy Manning, who I interviewed and will be part of this series, because She's also a certified trainer in nonviolent communication, and she came out with her book, Anti-Racist Conversations. And we're aligned about the power of compassion in these conversations. But also, yeah, I think sometimes the people have different ways of teaching nonviolent communication. And I'm so glad there are different ways of teaching, because sometimes you have one way that really resonates with someone. And some people really want a more structured, like I have friends who teach a very structured nonviolent communication way. And sometimes that can really work. And then other people are very much into the one-on-one, like we're both human and all of our needs are similar. And then what I feel Roxy brings into the conversation of NVC is, and it's also in what I teach too, is like looking at the structural, like what brought you here? Like, how do we include that when we're having conversations that are real? So I'm grateful for that conversation. And then I'm also excited about my conversation with Andrew Gibbons, who is a Feldenkrais teacher. And people are like, Feldenkrais? What is Feldenkrais? Well, that's a body work that's very gentle. It's like, God, it's like nothing else but it's about like how parts of your body, like movement so that you can work more. Actually, I'll describe it this way. Like I had this hip pain that came on and like I tried lots of different things, but Feldenkrais helped the most because what happens is that other people could put my body in place, but Feldenkrais helped me learn how to walk differently so that it stayed in place.
Wow.
So I feel like body and connecting to body is at the root, because one of the things we're doing in order to survive is disconnecting from our body. We might work late. We might numb ourselves so that we don't feel things. We might do all these things. And what we're doing is disconnecting from where the emotions exist in our body. And we know that if we have stress, it has physical consequences to our body. So, and then what I love about Feldenkrais is that it's not just about fixing the body, but it's about this quality of connection with my body, where after I do a Feldenkrais session, and not all of it some of it I can do on my own, just like you can do yoga on your own. I like walk and my posture is different, but also the way I see the world is different because there's that body-mind connection. And I wanted to offer that as a very unusual offering, maybe sometimes to our Next Economy, because how like we live in our bodies. So can that be the place where we start the journey of the Next Economy, is a different relationship with our bodies?
I'm so excited for that conversation. It's been a lot of my journey too, but yeah, I think you mentioned prior when we were talking that sometimes it just feels like we're heads like moving around in this space or this virtual space. And yeah, I think through this conversation, we've seen a lot like the cost of separation, like separation from other people, separation from our bodies and ourselves. So there's this through line that I'm seeing of reconnection and repair that I think is really beautiful and going to be super nourishing for the rest of the series, which I'm super excited about. I know that we're like nearing the end of the time for our conversation, but I want to kind of just give folks a couple of things to leave with. I guess, first of all, you've put together some really lovely resources that we'll link in the show notes and also on the Culture Offerings webpage. But I'm wondering if you can talk about just a couple of practical ways that people can apply these ideas of self-connection just at the smallest level, maybe at the self level, maybe they go to the workshop to just kind of expand it outward. But what are some practices that people can kind of start with today for that reconnection?
It's like putting a name to your feelings, because we know that just naming them, like a lot of times people feel like, I don't want to feel something if I can't fix it. But there's something about just feeling it that, and it might be that the feeling was at a 9, but if you pay attention, usually it'll go down to an 8. Sometimes it might go down to a 5. There's something about saying, hey, like, what's happening? I'm angry. Oh, I'm also sad. I'm also panicked. And that putting a name to it makes the system. And so one of the resources I have is the self-connection worksheet that you can use, and it has the feelings and needs sheet with it. And so that can help you like have something that you can look at, and it could take you like 2 minutes a day to just look at that and help you create more of a capacity to hold the stuff that's happening inside.
Beautiful. Yeah. And we'll link that in the show notes for folks that are interested. And then for people who
and also,
are maybe...
I just wanted to say also that I also have a sheet about work-life balance that I'm excited to share. And it's like...
We need that.
Yeah. So that can help you with some really good ways to explore that and to have more self-awareness about some of the patterns that might be happening for you around that.
I will be looking at that right after this call. I think we all struggle with it. So that's awesome. For folks who are just curious a little bit more about the Culture Offering series, can you just share a little bit about when that starts? I know that you've also got some free intros and coaching available. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how folks can connect with you and start to develop some of these skills for themselves.
Yes. So I have a free intro on Friday the 9th at 10 a.m. Pacific. And then they were so popular that we created another free intro on 23rd at 8 a.m. So we'd love to have all of you there. And if you go to Next Economy Culture, and then I think it's under Cultural Offerings, if it's under...
Yeah. I'm the marketing person. I'll make sure it's in the show notes. I think the link for folks listening, but it'll also be there, is bit.ly/culture offerings. And that'll take you to the page where all these resources are.
Yes. And then the workshop, Surfing Workplace Waves, starts on the 1st. And you can, we encourage you to make the investment of doing the whole series, but they also work individually. If you're like, I might not have time to do the other ones, but I definitely want to do the offering feedback in the workplace or standing your ground under fire, you can also take them as individuals. I also wanted to say that I have a friend who's a certified VC trainer who took the offering feedback, and she was like one of the best feedback off trainings she's taken. So it's just like, these are good for people who have a lot of experience as well as people who are beginners. I worked very hard to make it accessible in that way.
Yeah, you did a great job. I didn't know anything about MVC when I joined the first one, but immediately felt resonance in what you were trying to do. And yeah, there was a lot of skill building there as well. That's awesome. All right. Well, I think we can wrap this up. Just a huge gratitude to you, Phoenix. I feel super lucky to be able to work alongside you and learn from you. And yeah, there's a really deep and powerful thread here that I think that you're speaking to some of this work. And I know that our listeners will benefit. So we'll get this posted with all of those show notes and resources. But anything else before we sign off?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I really appreciate all the work you've done to connect to yourself. And yeah, it's been lovely. Glad you're my teammate.
Everybody say teammates. Teammates. All right. Thanks.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Before you go, we wanted to let you know that our spring cohort of the Next Economy MBA begins on March 26th. If you're an entrepreneur seeking to create a business that works for all life, a member of a team looking to transition your organization into one that is more regenerative and democratic, or someone who's considering a career or livelihood transition and embodiment with your values, we designed this course for you. Over this 9-month learning journey, you'll have the chance to learn practical skills around business and life design based on our work with over 250 social enterprises. In addition to live sessions, you can deepen your experience and practice with special sessions, affinity groups, and connections with over 500 alumni who have participated in the course. Interested in learning more? Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to view our course curriculum and sign up for a free intro with one of our facilitators. If you're ready to sign up, you can use the code PODCASTMBA to save 10% on tuition. We hope you'll join us.